So I think we're going to get started. I think people will join in a little bit late, but thank you all for joining. Um, this evening we have a exciting artist talk by David Bunn Martine. David's work is currently in the Moz House exhibit Shinnecock Speaks, which is on view just until September 7th. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the show, we're open by appointment. David has a mural of Conscience Point pre-contact that I'm sure he'll speak more about. But David does a lot of work and visual art around our tribal ancestry, so sort of pre-contact cultural representation, cultural figures, among many other subject matter. So I'm going to be controlling the slides. David will speak for about 30 minutes, and then either at the end or during the presentation you can put your questions into the chat, or we can unmute to ask them. I think if nothing else, David, you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to do this PowerPoint. Thank you all for joining. As Jeremy said, my name is Dave Martine. I'm a member of the Shinnecock and Montauk Nations and the Chiricahua Apache, Fort Sill Apache tribe. It's located in Oklahoma. This show is some of my larger scale work I'd done a few years ago, put together a series of paintings based on Shinnecock or Montauk heritage from colonial times. I think I have other pieces as well, other subject matter. I enjoy historical narratives in oil. I love painting in oil, acrylic, watercolor, and the pieces that you'll see mostly are oil on either masonite panel or plywood panel. This first one, Shinnecock Legacy, is something that I put together a while back, referencing our cultural heritage as whalers, hunting the great whales around the world, and the two figures in the background would be, say, pre-colonial style appearance, and then the two figures in the front represent 19th century, 18th or 19th century, with the oil skins covering that they used on ships and so forth, with our connection to the life-saving units that made up originally became the Coast Guard and our the rescue dory rescue squads that our people joined in to rescue sailors who had were on shipwrecks all around Long Island as well. So, next. Okay, this first piece was inspired by some academic studies of the Long Island Native American time periods, the ancient periods of history, and their particular qualities and things that were going on in their respective time periods. So this Paleolithic period, again, is this one of a series of 4 foot by 8 foot paintings on oil on masonite. And this particular series was done in 1998. As you can see, it shows some hunters in full tailored skin clothing, caribou, hunting the caribou during the Paleo period, which is roughly 10,000 years ago, since we have 10,000 years of heritage on Long Island itself. Conditions were very much like tundra, permanent ice conditions. You can see the giant beaver in the foreground, and the people are getting ready to go out on a caribou hunt. And the lifestyle is very much like the Inuit people, the circumpolar peoples around northern Canada at the time. And that was a fun one to do. You know, they used methods of hunting were very ancient, and some tribes even continue some of that lifestyle somewhat today in Siberia and other places. You can go and get a feeling as to what that ancient period must have been like here in Long Island. Next. Okay, as you move through time, the academic people again say that they quantify the period as being early, middle, and late Archaic, which came after the Paleo period. This is section from a series of panels I put together. Total size is about 8 by 20 feet. And it again shows typical activities that would have been going on during the Archaic period, again, in Long Island itself, characterized by the climate being very much like northern Canada, where the people would survive on nature's bounty. They weren't cultivating crops at this time. They were living on all of the shellfish and the fruits and vegetables that were available from nature. They were gathering all of those together. Here you can see a man throwing the atlatl, which was the one advancement they had from the hand-thrown spear point from the Paleo period. They were using what is known as an atlatl or spear thrower, which could increase the speed of the projectile point to hunt the deer or some of the other mammals that were available. People in the background are harvesting shellfish from the weirs or the fish nets. They found some of those fish nets setups off of the Connecticut coast, I believe, that go back to this period. The post holes were discovered under the water off of the shoreline of Connecticut a few years back. I think they probably date 5,000 years ago. That's what this period of time would be. They began to settle in village-like conditions and begin to create the watercraft from hollowed out logs, the dugout canoes, and the long houses made of maple bark. And a lot of the trees, though, were mostly cone-bearing trees at that time. Next. One of the interesting things about containers is that they use a steatite pottery, which is like a white soapstone material that was made in some of the earliest containers, hollowed out soapstone steatite. They say that was never naturally available on Long Island. Somehow our people brought it over from the mainland, which would be across so-called Long Island Sound today, and began to fabricate these steatite pots. You can see the white container in the middle there, in addition to hollowing out wooden containers, either from the burls of trees or what have you. So those made up some of the containers. You can see the boy on the left side has a moose call of rolled bark that would be blown like a horn, and they could attract the game, because they knew everything about animal behavior and could attract all the game that they would need, to live very well at the time. You can see the adze that the guy is using to smooth out the outside of the tree bark. A hollowed out tree that's for the canoe in the foreground. And then the women in the background picking berries and other kinds of natural fruits and vegetables that were provided by nature and what have you, and processing that for their food. Scraping off bark, all the activities that would have happened. Next. The way I work in creating these images is doing a lot of research, assembling a visual reference materials, and then creating a design all drawn out in detail beforehand, and that's transferred to the panel. I also apply certain characteristics that we know that native people, indigenous people, how they lived, things that they may or may not have done, we put into the scene. So it's not just based on physical materials alone. We know that how the lifestyle was, and we try to be very accurate about it. I like to try to be as accurate as I can get in the depiction of these particular kinds of scenes, because most people are not aware of all the detail that would be in there. Transition Orient culture phase. This is representative by a site called Sugarloaf Hill, which is one of the most sacred sites probably of all Long Island. There was a series of high areas on Long Island, about 5 of them, I think, in total, where there were multiple burial pits of our ancestors on the eastern slopes of the hills. That's what they found on Sugarloaf Hill, which is about 300 feet high. I think it's one of the highest points on Long Island. It was an archaeological site that at first was destroyed and the contents removed from the graves, but in recent years it has been preserved. The sacred site has been preserved for the benefit of the Shinnecock people. It's a great blessing to have that area now preserved under the the auspices of the tribe because it's a very sacred site, of course. But this is an artistic interpretation of a ceremonial where the people, the burial bundles were interred there together, and all of the objects that would have accompanied them in the ceremony, in the burial. Again, this is approximately 3,500 years ago, so this is still a very ancient period of time. Almost the same time as the mound builder cultures in the Midwest, Cahokia, the Hopewell peoples, a lot of those people who built mounds. Well, the people here used the natural hills they didn't have to construct it here. They just used the hills that were here. Next. Oh, this is just a map to kind of show you some of our relative tribes that were nearby our area in the present New England area. This is from that series of Smithsonian series on Native American cultures, the large series of encyclopedic series of Native American tribes that you can get in many research libraries. I thought this is one of the best maps I've ever seen. So it's a little hard to see at a distance, but if you get that series of books on the northeastern tribes, you'll find this map. Next. Okay, this is another scene here of the woodland period. So after the transitional period, the period where English settlers arrived, 1640, I tried to show many of the activities that our people would have been engaged in at the time, including whaling, which was done more in wintertime, I believe, on the lower right side. And then the ceremonials that would have taken place during our so-called a June meeting, or June meeting Sunday, as we call it today, which would have been a feast of recreational activities. And we would have invited many of our relative tribes from other parts of Long Island and New England to come and enjoy having a feast, a meal, and then maybe participating in games of lacrosse, for example. So since that was a Native American game invented by our people and the Haudenosaunee people and so forth, many tribes had versions of lacrosse or that sort of thing, stickball, what have you. So that's what I try to depict in detail, and all of the activities, the arts, domestic arts that the people would have engaged in, making pottery, baskets, the native dogs that would have been the indigenous species of dog that we had before the English settlers arrived, and the typical wigwams and lodges that we had made out of cattail reed mats, bark for the winter, and so forth. Then you can see the garb, the traditional clothing, the feather woven capes, the tanned buckskin of deer hide, and all of the ornamentation from moose hair embroidery, the wampum bead embroidery, etc., and all of the painted designs on the deer hides. I tried to make it as picturesque as possible and give you as much detail as possible, because sometimes you see interpretations of Native peoples of this time period, and they don't give you all of the beautiful ornamentation that the people would have worn on occasion as well. That's why I tried to get very accurate in there. The leggings, the moccasins, and so forth. Next. Okay, this is another interesting one I call there, Shinnecock Man of 18th century. And you can see beginning to blend the trade goods from the English settlers, the material for the shirt and the blanket and all of those things and all of the goods that would have been available to our people through trade goods. Some of those things were given in exchange for as part of treaty, you might say, or deed materials that would have gone with deeds and land transactions. A lot of these things were not, way out of balance in terms of value. But a lot of the things were readily adopted by our people, especially cast iron for containers and cloth, because it's much easier to create garments rather than have to process deer skins and hides. A lot of those kinds of things were changed over during this period of transition. Still made wampum belts, still used leather leggings, footwear, and traditional houses were still the same, but they still also had trade goods that they used as well. Next. Okay, this is another oil. These are all oil on masonite or plywood panel. This is approximately 40 by 40-inch square, called this morning prayer at Shinnecock, which shows more representative of the pre-contact appearance, and the garments made all of deer hide, processed hide, and the body painting, tattoos, and all of that sort of thing that you might have seen during that period of time around the shoreline. You see the cattail reeds. Cattails, for in a large extent, died out because they were put. The Phragmites reed was something that came in from. It wasn't local, but it kind of squeezed out, and a lot of the development or what have you. A lot of the cattail reeds, you can't find them anymore. That's what they used traditionally. The Phragmites reed that we have today around the wetlands was not native originally. Next. Okay, this is fun to do. This is sort of based on some of the early writings from what the explorers saw, some of the early ceremonials, healing rituals, and so forth that the people did. We're closely related to the Lenape, the Delaware tribes, and so forth, and Narragansett, Mohegan, and a lot of our peoples did something similar in terms of the rituals and ceremonialism, and using water drums originally. You can see again the turkey feather cape in the front. They made very detailed materials of feather work. This is not as detailed as and as complex as some of the woven feather work that was also made for comfort as well as for warmth. Blankets, complete blankets made out of feather work, so forth. Okay, next. This is another one. It was another one kind of similar to the other, but I got into even more detail of the finger woven bandolier over one shoulder, the belt made out of dyed plant fiber originally, the German silver neck pieces. A lot of this appearance is very similar to many of the tribes east of the Mississippi River looked relatively similar in dress at this period of time, with a long shirt, the so-called just shaved hair style. Some of the Midwest tribes call that a roached hairstyle. And then the club, the wooden club, the ball-headed club that he's using for ceremonial purposes at this time. But they were actually used as a weapon during the colonial wars, French and Indian War, Revolutionary War, all these kinds of conflicts. This is one of the traditional weapons they had. And then the ceremonial fan that people still use today for many occasions, social and spiritual occasions, and the traditional Shinnecock thatched house in the background, originally made out of blue stem meadowgrass or seagrass.
Oh, that's pretty.
Okay, next. Okay, yet another version. This is another one to made. I do a lot of portrait commissions as well, but I like to utilize them put them in the old scenes, of many years ago. Again, during the woodland period of time, basically, right around the time of colonial expansionism, you could say, on the East End here. Next. Oh, this is another good one. This is when I started working in acrylics. I started in oils way back in 1977. So I've been in oil, then I started acrylics seriously in relatively recent years. This is acrylic on canvas. Again, I always wanted to make one named after Mokomato, who was one of the three sachems that signed the first deed for the town of Southampton. For the deed during the time period of Southampton itself. And some of these deeds, of course, were not honored and so forth, but our people signed these in good faith, and this is my interpretation of one of the main sachems of the time, three chiefs You can see the painted deerskin tattooing, the shell work, ornamentation, necklaces, and then the wampum bead headband and the feather work. And they had many, many different kinds of furs that were used in great, great quantity. They used furs of all kinds of mammals and so forth. Next. Yeah, this is a woman I did for the 18th century. You can see the typical Algonquin baby carrier there, that was mother would have carried on her back when she was working for protection of the baby. And then the dress is, again, cloth made out of trade cloth that would have been available at the time. Duffel cloth, I think, is one term they use for it. Again, this is 18th century particularly. The Delaware tribe, many of the Iroquois peoples, the look is very similar, so forth. This is supposed to be under the shade tree, relaxing late in the day. Next. Okay, this one is actually up at New York State Museum in Albany. This is another one. Mandouche is another one of those three original chiefs, signed one of the first deeds of the tribe. This is my interpretation. Again, it's all based on probability of appearance. In some of the tribes, a lot of the men would have plucked out all the facial hair, but I like to put a little facial hair in these particular images. You can see the porcupine quill wrapped feathers in his headpiece. That's what that design is over the feather, and then the bead work around his neck and painting the hide itself. So face painting, all that. Next. Oh yeah, this is an example. This is pure historical for your reference. This is a modern replicated wampum belt made of the quahog clamshell, purple and white. This is what our people were very, very famous for. We engaged in trade with many native nations in the Northeast, great deal with the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, Six Nations tribes and so forth. And that, of course, had political and spiritual importance for rituals purposes, as well as engaged in political agreements, negotiations in terms of that. All special occasions, there'd usually be an exchange of wampum strings or wampum belts of some form or fashion to kind of make a solemn occasion out of certain social events even, Next. Oh yeah, this is a good one. This is, if you ever go to Wyandanch train station in the, they had Long Island Railroad made a plaque out of this image here on the Wyandanch Long Island Railroad train station. I always wanted to do one of Wyandanch, and I sort of used the features of Stephen Talkhouse Pharaoh, if you ever see that photograph. But I made him look a lot older, I made him look a little older for Wyandanch, so forth. So he's very famous, of course, during the early colonial period, and I wanted to put him there in all his glory, You can see the reason I have a full facial style, I wanted to rivet your attention there. It's symbolic as well as contemporary in a way, with a flat background and the bright colors. This is acrylic again on canvas. Next. Well, this is a good one. This is oil on masonite panel. It's a little more symbolic, showing some of the people working, going to, harvesting some of the wild roses, some of the musical instruments that would have been used during the early ceremonials of the people there, the gourd rattles, you can see the leggings material out of deer hide, and then the wickiup or witu wigwam there, the circular house in the background, the thatch style that we would have had probably in the summer or spring, a warmer climate. In the winter, they would have had made out of, maple bark, some kind of tree bark in the winter. Next. Okay, this is a good one. This is supposed to be the Powderwee name is supposedly the name they would have used for the hunt itself, the whale hunt. So I made the whale hunt whalers in the dugout canoe right up on top of the whale so that they could use their harpoon. Our people were extremely famous for being whalers. We were hired. The earliest whaling contract, I believe, was 1670, which was an agreement that we made with the English settlers to work with them at the time. The Uncochaw tribe, I believe, and some of our people wanted to start their own whaling companies, but the English, I believe, opposed this. They didn't want us going into business for ourselves. We had to adopt early to the economic pressures, you might say, the economic system that was being imposed on us. And that was one way we could somewhat continue traditional activity by going and working with the whales. And so, because our people knew everything about the ocean that probably you could imagine, they almost had a psychic connection to the behaviors of all the sea life. They knew every bit of behavior, and they were very good harpooners. So when our people went around the world on the ships, the whaling ships in later years, we were hired a great deal for being harpooners on the big whaling ships. Next. Okay, this is my interpretation of a Thanksgiving ceremony on the beach. Pre-colonial, somewhat, is the type of dance shown as today they would call it a stomp dance or a line dance, one in front of the other. You can see all of the produce, the vegetables. Our people were known for corn, beans, squash, and I put other things there, pumpkins and gourds and corn and all sorts of Jerusalem artichokes was one of the original foodstuffs that our people would harvest. And the dugout canoes. And so this is a ritual that has been recorded in the history books that we had for the receipt of the whale. That was considered a blessing from the creator, when the whale would beach themselves. And that was always a great celebration and a great ritual of gratitude to the gift of the whales since ancient times. Next. Oh, this is a good map. It shows you the early whale migration routes all around Long Island at the time. The early type of whaling was called drift whaling. They were so numerous, they would just beach themselves on their own. You didn't have to go out and hunt them. And later, our people taught the English settlers what was known as offshore whaling. And then they went out and began to deplete all of the whale that was available. They killed everything that moved. They overkill later, the English settlers and so forth. They killed it all out, stock. And then they had to go further and further out in the ocean to begin to try out the blubber, as they call it, to get the whale oil, which they began to use in lanterns and all up until the oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. That's what our people helped the economy of this nation many, many years ago. All of the whale oil lamps to light all of the country, all of the towns in New England. A lot of those things, that sort of thing was assisted by our people, and it's something they don't often recognize. Next. This is another interesting one. Again, 17th century period, 1700s period again, which is fun to combine the material cultures of the native people and then the trade materials there, typical garments, flute. That was one of the traditional instruments we had from ancient times and so forth. This piece, you can see this piece, actually, this at the Rogers Memorial Library in Southampton, New York. Next. Oh yeah, this is one of our ancestors who was on the Circassian shipwreck in the 19th century. This is something that has been recognized in the history books as a very tragic time for the nation, because a lot of our ancestors were, at that time, had been retired as whalers, but they were hired to salvage the freight of the iron ship, a Circassian. That ship was very famous during the Civil War prior to this time of 1876. That's miswritten. It should read 1876. That's when the Circassian shipwreck occurred, off Bridgehampton, New York. And this is one of our ancestors at the time who drowned on the ship. Next. Yeah, this is what the ship looks like. That's, you can see today up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. That was a ship one of my great-grandfather was a first mate on. Many of the Native Americans in New England not only were whalers, but became captains and part of the officer crews of many of the ships went around to the South Pacific, Hawaiian Islands. A lot of our people were buried in Honolulu, Hawaii. Some were buried at sea off the coast of Japan, Korea. And some of them went into the Tonga, the Polynesian islands, and never returned to Long Island. You know, they went there by ship and joined some of the Polynesian people in some of the South Pacific islands. Next. Yeah, that's another version of the Circassian. Maybe we can move just a little faster and get close to the end here. That's my great-great-grandfather, one of the first mates of one of the ships. Next. These are just ancestors of many of our people on the reservation. We have a very, very good archival collection available to the tribe. Next. And next. Oh, yes, this is one of the ceremonial dances that would have been something akin to what our ancestors did way back in the ancient period of time. This is an intermediary between the native people and the game animals. This particular image is from the Lenape, Delaware people. But as you know, a part of their people occupied Long Island, and we had very close relationships with the Lenape and Delaware people as well. Next. This is one of the big house structure of that particular ceremonial. Next. Oh yeah, this is one of the early churches in the tribe at the time in the 80s. A representative of some of the early church sects that grew out of northern New York at the time, called Millerites, the Millerite sect of Christian tradition. And some of our people used to go to this small church. Today, the main division that the early history of the colonial period was the Presbyterian Church, however. Next. Oh yeah, this is the church we have today, way back after the hurricane of 38. Next. Oh, this is one of my grandfather's brothers. He played in the first second U.S. Open golf tournament. He was a golf pro and was very well known as a professional golfer. Many Native Americans today are very good golfers, and they're finally being recognized as contributing to the professional game of golf in the United States. Next. And there he is here from an old newspaper demonstrating how to swing the club before 1910. So I think we probably got, my 30 minutes is up. We've gotten about as far as I can. And if anyone has any questions, maybe Jeremy can let me know. And I appreciate everyone's listening. And if I can answer any other questions, I'd appreciate it. I would enjoy that. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, David. That was very informative. Maybe we can open that up to the audience for questions, and I'm happy to go back to any of the slides. But I wonder if maybe I'll start with the first question. I was going to ask if you could describe your artistic process in more detail.
Yes, I've always enjoyed a more traditional or classical realism. I consider myself a realist. I'm trying to experiment more. I'm thinking of doing a new series combining figurative work with more abstract design elements. I haven't begun the series yet, but I would like to do that. I like to try to alternate between more straight realism or narrative realism, storytelling images with something that is a little more combining more abstract design elements and realistic figurative work. Most of these are straight more narrative realism. They're large scale pictures. At the time I was doing these. So, as I said, I like to combine many, maybe photographic references, and I created design. It's original and that has the elements in it that I want. If it's about Native Americans from Long Island or the Algonquin tribes of New England, I like to put a lot of that detail in as much as I can. The ones where I have a flat background, a monochromatic background, I like too, because they're a little more contemporary in style, more pop culture oriented, which I also enjoy. But I usually do that more. Here's one. Yes, it's more of something where I just want to bring attention to the figure and drive home the strength of design of the figure. Now, this again is acrylic, so I really enjoy acrylics sometimes too, because it is a different technique to use them, but you can get very strong color with them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Does anyone else have any questions in the chat? You can either raise your hand or unmute. Oh, I
Hi,
see.
everybody. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you can go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to ask. I do have questions. Sorry. My name's Moira. Sorry to interrupt. I can't find the raise hand thing, but I'll figure it out. Sorry. I do have a question. I love the solid color background works that you're doing too, because they also make me think of when people were doing portraits early on in the like the masters, so-called masters works, and how your portrait, the figures all look straight out and really like look at us and get our attention, and kind of they're so present. I mean, everybody's really present. And I was wondering, what was your decision? Like, how do you decide to do a painting in oil or a painting in acrylic? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for noticing. Yes, if I do a narrative picture, even with a scene of figures, I usually try to have one of the figures looking out towards the viewer. I guess part of that is something I've seen in illustrators' technique, such as Norman Rockwell, for example, where they have some of the figures are looking out towards the audience that's looking in. So you have an exchange there, a sort of I don't know, psychic exchange, I suppose. Also, the full frontal figure is somewhat inspired by some of the early photographers like Harrington, who used to, in a sense, that's a little more negative in connotation, because he used to take photographs in the early 20th century of Native Americans around the country, and they would take a full frontal and then a profile. And it became a stylized sort of thing that would be almost an artificial technique to try to supposedly give the sitter, the subject, a sort of dignified appearance, but it was also in a way done by as almost a scientific way to look on a people that they considered to be very exotic at the time. They didn't understand Native American people in the early 20th century for many reasons, and some of the early photographers wanted to maintain a distance, a formality, and if they didn't see that formality, they even create, like Curtis, the early photographer Curtis, would sometimes want his sitters to dress in traditional clothing, when in the early 20th century, many of the people were just wearing ordinary clothes like American people wore, and didn't always appear in their traditional clothing. So it has a lot of stylistic connotations to it, the front face, and you could have there's a lot of reasons for it involved there, but I'm glad you noticed that. Thank you.
I see Denise Williams has a question if you want to unmute.
Hi, I just did. I hope you can hear me okay. Um, Mr. Martine, I wanted to say thank you for your lifetime work. I think it's very valuable. I've been kind of admiring it every chance I can get. I've been to upstate. I've seen it in the education building there, the museum up there. I think you also may have a piece in the COT building, from what I'm told. And I also have to tell you that we are utilizing a lot of your pieces and your work and your history in the Shinnecock culture and language course that we are developing at the high school. I don't know if you're aware of that we're developing that course.
Yes, I'm very, thank you for letting me know. Sure. I think that's wonderful. I'm very honored that that's one reason I made them, people to see them. There's nobody, it's a rarity to find something that, especially for the native people in the region, in the area generally, to find anything that is reliable somewhat in all humbleness, you might say. Because people were so heavily stereotyped, and I always tried to move away from that in my work. I always try to make something that you can explain, that has some basis in accuracy, in reality, and know where it came from. If you don't know, try to find out. But again, the native people in general have always been so highly stereotyped and about things that the image, of course, it's not, may or may not be, as reliable or as accurate as you would like. But of course, I always put my own particular twist on there, too, and about some of the appearances, but some of the activities that we did, though, is based on ordinary activities they did to survive, But I always try to show the people very strong in design, ornate appearance, especially in the material culture, because usually, whether they realize it or not, to show people that not to their best advantage, even with the garments and the way what they used to wear and use on a daily basis, I think is doing a disservice. I was thinking of some painting in the Museum of Natural History in the city, where some of the native people were greeting the early Dutch settlers, in Manhattan. And they show some of the chiefs walking towards the sailors, the Dutch settlers that came off the ships. And I just wish that, I could paint some of the things that they could have been wearing. They did talk about the feathered capes that they saw when they saw the people in their canoes and their watercraft approaching the ships. That's something that was very ancient, But all of the detail, the handwork that they would have used, that was available to them, that's something that was never really, described very much. I did work when I worked at the National Museum of the American Indian for a short period of time, and we worked some of the collections. And I've handled directly some of the oldest garments they had, like from 1780, let's say, from Upper New York, up the Hudson River, and they were highly embroidered leather garments, with detail design sewn in there. It's beautiful stuff. You'd never imagine it was made so long ago, and it's very well preserved. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Oh, and David, I was going to ask, I was going to bring the image of your work in the current show to the screen. Can you see this pretty well?
Yes, I don't see it, but I know I can remember what it is. Would you like me to describe it?
Oh, sure. Let me see if I could fix the what I'm sharing.
Oh yeah. So I did do this piece that was actually a study painting for oh, here we go. Thank you. A study painting for an intended mural. The mural hasn't been done yet, but I wanted to show a place in northern part of the village of Southampton called Conscience Point, which is where the English settlers first landed in 1640, and our people met them on the shoreline. And I tried to create what the appearance of the shoreline would have looked like when our people had a little settlement there, a village. on the shore. And you can see the structures in the background on the left side, the different types of structures that I tried to show very clearly. And then the different styles of watercraft that are based on accuracy, on actual records. One of the interesting ones I wanted to include was a pointed canoe from the bow, and the front and the back of the canoe has a pointed edge to it. This is something you don't see very often. We see a lot of the rounded end canoes, some of them with the raised sort of handle-like structures on them. But I know they found quite a large canoe when they were digging subway tunnels in Manhattan many years ago, of a pointed nose canoe, and it had a very sharp upturn in the front, sharp point on the end. And that would be fun to recreate sometime. We did restore some canoes in the tribe from trees, burning out trees. It's a long process, but were able to bring back the knowledge of hand burning and carving out tree trunks in canoes, canoe usage. They also, in the colonial period, probably used a form of sail. So I wanted to have big sails put in the big canoe there. You can see the sachem or the chief at the head of the canoe wearing a headdress, and he's presenting a wampum belt to the shore, people coming ashore. I think they say now they would have had an elaborate ritual of welcoming people to the shoreline. Now, this is supposed to be our people now. I'm not showing the English settlers in the scene, but they're all our people, showing just activities, normal activities they would have been engaged in. And you can see the fish traps in the background, where they would have been able to trap any kind of seafood. That's a very ancient method of attracting, the fish there, and then harvesting everything they needed. You had an abundance of seafood available to our people, both shellfish and otherwise. And of course, many of those things have all died out because of chemical and sewage pollution, or over enrichment of the water by nitrogen. You have the brown tide, green tide. I don't know what else you have today, because they've allowed so much development on the shorelines, and the runoff from highways today has destroyed a lot of our traditional seafood and plant life that was around the shoreline. So I really wanted to step back in time, and make the viewer look like he's engaged in the activities as they might have been, and living their life to the fullest as they understood it, very close to the Creator, every aspect of nature, and they were doing very, very well. And then, of course, during that contact period, things began to change pretty rapidly. But at this time period, you could say just before contact with the English settlers is probably a good time period. So thanks a lot. I was glad to have this piece in the show. And maybe one of these days I'd like to find a place that I could, that would like to have a mural of this, a larger scale piece of this. I think it would be very good for people to see and get a feeling for what a lot of the things that would have been going on here, in ancient times. People are visiting relative tribes, from upper New England. They're the Mohegan people. I mean, they went back and forth across Long Island Sound very easily. They knew every piece of water line, in the area. They went from eastern Long Island all the way into current New York City on dugout canoe boats. The largest one could hold 40 men. So it was something much more extensive than most people realize. So thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm gonna switch back over to the other PowerPoint. Anyone else have any questions for David, or any particular pieces?
Can I ask if Mr. Martine does any other like presentations that maybe we could bring the students to, whether it's, through one of the programs we have on territory or through the course that we have at the high school, or even in Tuckahoe, we have children learning the curriculum for Shinnecock Nation as well, and the language, etc. I don't know where he might be that we could visit, or maybe like a trip of it, or if he'd be available to meet with us in district or anything like that. But I think the children would get so much out of it.
Sure, I'd love to go. That's something I would enjoy, and just let me know, ahead of time. We could set a time if you think you're interested, and let me know exactly what you'd like. And I have also talk about the Circassian shipwreck. I have some reference material on our heritage as whalers and maritime people, mariners, and also I also talk about, actually, I have one on contemporary Native American art. I have written a book called New York Movement of Contemporary Native American Art. Many Native artists of tribes all across the United States wound up coming to New York City all through the 20th century and continue to do so, in the visual arts. And they got very much into abstract expressionism. This is something maybe for older people. I don't know. It depends on the age. But I also have done a talk on that too, which is little known history, very little recognized, by the general public, because people are very familiar with abstract expression, especially all the artists on the east end of Long Island, but they don't realize that Native American indigenous people were very much engaged with the New York school of abstract expressionism as well. So that's something I also have in a PowerPoint form. So thank you.
David, is your contact page on your website the best way to get in touch with you?
No, I probably not. Maybe I can get in touch with you. I'm not have to give it a little thought, to be honest with you. I think I have to update some of that information, but I can let you know, what would be the best thing to do. But
we have
I am
visited your
available.
page. We
Yeah,
have visited your website also and pulling information
okay.
from it.
Yeah, usually what going through my website, it reaches my email. So that's probably a good idea. Yeah, thank you for letting me know that. Yeah. I don't, I'm not too much into the social media, but I do have a website. So thank you.
All right. Do we have one last question for David before we wrap up for the evening?
Well, I do thank everyone for joining, and I thank you very much again, Jeremy, for setting this up. Much appreciated. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll see everyone here at Powwow this weekend, the 30th to the 2nd. But thanks again, and David's painting will be up at Ma's house until September 7th, so I'll talk to you all soon.
Wonderful. Okay, goodbye, everybody. Thank you again.